Okay, the recording has begun. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm thrilled at how many people have decided to tune in tonight. Um, and I know some of you are from New Audubon, Bay Area Bird Club, UW Green Bay, Oneida, and beyond. And we are really happy to see all of you tonight. So my name is Erin Giese. I'm president of the Northeastern Wisconsin Audubon Society here in the Green Bay area. I also work at UW Green Bay's Conference Center for Biodiversity. A little bit about Northeastern Wisconsin Audubon, or we call ourselves New Audubon for short. Our mission is to protect birds and the places they need today and tomorrow using science, advocacy, education, and on-the-ground conservation. We're always looking for new members, and I encourage you to check out our website to learn more about our work. I have one of our board members tonight, Mike Reed, will be dropping some links in the chat box for you tonight. So he'll drop a link on our Audubon chapter. And it's our goal at New Audubon for all people to feel included and welcome in all aspects of the work that we do. And we invite you to read our full equity, diversity, and inclusion statements as well. And Mike will be dropping that link in the chat as well. And we at New Audubon also hold a really deep respect for First Nations people. And I would like to read our land acknowledgement statement, which we read before all of our public events, that speaks to the importance of First Nations communities. So I'm going to share my screen so that you all can see that statement written and follow along with me. So New Audubon acknowledges what is now northeastern Wisconsin as the ancestral homeland of the Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin, Ho-Chunk Nation, Forest County, Potawatomi, Ojibwe Nation, and Ottawa Nation. These nations have deep spiritual and cultural connections to the land over which New Audubon's membership area now extends. We are so thankful to be able to carry out our mission to protect birds and the places they need within First Nations traditional homelands. New Audubon appreciates the important natural areas and resources provided not only for the avian community, but for our membership community as well. Today, the Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin and the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin inhabit northeastern Wisconsin, which is within our membership area, and they care for its natural resources. We thank all 12 of Wisconsin's First Nations for their devoted stewardship and conservation of these lands. And we at New Audubon acknowledge the First Nations people of Wisconsin, of northeastern Wisconsin, and are committed to honor and respect First Nations communities. And we encourage you to visit our website. Where we have our land acknowledgement statement posted, and you can also learn about all of Wisconsin's First Nations communities and ways to support them. And the project that we will be sharing with you tonight is a prime example of how New Audubon and its volunteers are taking action on acknowledging, respecting, and working with First Nations communities. For those of you less familiar with Zoom, I encourage you to take a look at the Zoom cheat sheet that's we'll drop in the chat box for you. As I mentioned, this presentation is being recorded and it will be posted publicly to YouTube and elsewhere. And to give everyone the best possible virtual experience, when we officially get started, we ask that you keep yourselves muted and disable your videos. At the end, when we open it up for questions, certainly we encourage you to have your videos on. It's always nice to see people's faces when you ask questions. Tony, Randy, and I will give roughly a 45-minute talk, and after that, we will open it up for questions. Around 8 p.m., we'll have a virtual social for about 15-20 minutes. Give people a chance to say hello, talk about latest bird sightings, the weather, whatever you want to share. At the end, we'll open up for questions, as I mentioned, and you can feel free to drop a question in the chat box. And to view or activate the chat box, there's a little kind of like a comic bubble in the bottom middle labeled chat. So to activate it, all you have to do is click on it, and then a chat box will show up on the right-hand side of your screen. And you can type in your question there. And once you type in the question, just hit enter to send it. And then we will field questions at the end. Or you're welcome to unmute yourself as well. And if you're having any technical issues, please send them in the chat box to Mike Reed or to myself, and we will do the best that we can to help you. So with that, I'm going to reshare my screen again. And can everybody Tony, can you give me a nod that you can see my screen? Okay, fabulous. Thank you. All right, so tonight you're here to listen about habitat restoration that's been taking place at the Oneida Nation, followed up with some bird monitoring that we've been involved in. I want to give our other speakers a chance to introduce themselves. So I'll start with Tony, if you would unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Segole Segwake. Hello, everyone. I'm Tony Kuchma. I work for the Oneida Nation as a project manager in their environmental department, and I'm happy to see so many people here tonight. And I'd like to thank Erin and Randy too for helping out with this presentation to go over some of the really cool work that we've been involved with this field season. So thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Go ahead, Randy.
Segole Segwake. Deha Hungot Niyungyats. Hello, everybody. My name is Deha Hungot. Randy Cornelius Osunige is my English name. I've been with the tribe for, holy crap, 35 years. I'm currently retired, but just working part-time at the Culture Heritage. I worked as a language and cultural educator for 25, 30 years. And so I'm training the person who took my position, and been involved with this bird monitoring. It tweaked my interest when I seen that coming out, and learning a lot. So very fortunate that Erin and her programs and Tony, what they're doing of enhancing the Oneida Nation here. So go.
Thank you so much, Randy and Tony. And I'll start by saying this is one of the most fun projects I've been able to be a part of. And I'm so thankful, and I feel very privileged to work with Tony, Randy, and the other team members that I'll introduce to you in a minute. So tonight, we welcome you. And Randy, could you please say the Oneida word for welcome for us?
What Guanu Welat? What Guanu Welat?
Awesome.
And it's as close as we can get to that, but it's involves extending our greetings, our thankfulness, and love out to all of you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Randy, and welcome. Tonight, we will start by having Randy kick us off by sharing the Oneida creation story of how birds got their songs. Then we will switch gears, and Tony will share with you the restoration work that the Oneida Nation has been working on for years, and how that restoration work is now being monitored for birds through the new Audubon chapter. And that'll be my piece. And then I'll kick it back to Tony, who will share with you some thoughts on how the bird data that we're collecting are informing land management strategies and applications on the Oneida Nation. Randy will then close with a few remarks, and then we will open it up for questions at the end. So talking about this story tonight would be absolutely impossible without acknowledging the leadership team that has really helped pull this project together, both from Oneida's standpoint of the restoration work, and then continuing with the bird monitoring. So this has been a collaboration with the Oneida Nation, Pheasants Forever, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, New Audubon, and Audubon Great Lakes, and then my position at UW Green Bay. And these are all the faces that have helped pull a lot of this together. And the work, the bird monitoring work, wouldn't be possible without so many volunteers that have provided and offered their time and expertise to conduct the bird surveys out there. And I believe I captured just about every volunteer that's helped in some way, shape, or form over this last year. And Randy, could you say the Oneida word for thank you, please?
Y'all won't go. If we just said yow, that means thank you. But Yawant go, that go on the end really amplifies that thankfulness into that's really appreciative. Yawant go.
Wonderful. Thank you, Randy. And now I'm going to kick it back to you, Randy, to share with us the Oneida creation story on how birds got their songs.
So ne to the last ne ya county nen what kono peladu ne jung bitat so ne ka ne kwasundat ne yung dalo Erin nen unguli no doze data ko gwini gwinen angat kala kwe nen aga ladu say ne jitno ne joe down ne tika jitas lagi ne lodian ne lodilana suha ne kai ka jitna ne angat yan down and jitnole hangali wat gwini ne tuninole wage. So Erin had asked me, a while back if I would, share this story. I told this story one time when we got done with a bird monitoring session. And so she thought that that would be a really good one to tell. And they had a gathering a while back, but I wasn't able to make it. But Patty came out and recorded me. And so I told a version of that story, at that gathering, appreciation gathering. And so, so that's the story that I'm going to be telling. And this goes back into our creation story that we have, that we know of how everything came to be. And so the Oneidas were part of a confederacy of nations, what the United States referred to as the 5 nations, which later became the 6 nations, and French referred to us as the Iroquois. Well, we call ourselves Lodinoshuni, and what that means is that they are the builders of long houses, and it's has to do with our traditional dwellings that we lived in, and what they call long houses, and so. Amongst all those nations, that what we call the linguists call, Iroquois, there's a multitude of those nations. And originally we're from New York, just east of Syracuse is our homelands. And there is a group of our people that are still there. They never were removed. We were removed. And then there's another Oneida community in Ontario, south of London. And we had to go out there to learn, about our ceremonial and our history because of how acculturated our community came to be. And so in my travels, I've come to meet a lot of traditional people that know these stories. And so when we go back into the creation story, there's a time in there after the Creator had created everything here on the earth and gave everything a responsibility, gave everything a name, a purpose for being here. Is that they say early on, from time to time, he would come back and kind of look at things and make little adjustments here and there, so things would go accordingly. And the people, we were the very last things that were created. And he gave us our ways, our songs, our dances, and our understanding of how everything is to be. And one of the things, the very first message was that we're to be thankful, always be thankful, every day, be thankful. And so when we wake up every morning, we give thanks to the Creator, what some people call God. There's different names that different religions refer to that higher power as. In our language, we say Sungwayat Dizo. And what that means is that he's the one who created all of us. And all of us is everything in creation that he created. And the way that we're told is that that's our family. It's our extended family. And so every morning they say that we're to be thankful because we don't know if we're going to be here tomorrow. And so each day is like a miracle that we're here. And they say that we're all given so many days to be here. And so we're to treat each day as if it was our last day. and do what's right, do the best that we can. And so after we greet the Creator and give our thanks, there's songs that we have as another way of expressing that thankfulness. And we call them hadua in our language. And that refers to like breath. And that's what goes back into our creation story, is that the Creator put his breath into everything that he molded and shaped from the earth and gave it a spirit, gave it a purpose, gave it life. And so that's a song that we would sing when we first wake up and give thanks. And one time when the Creator came back, he was observing everything, and he seen the people doing that, giving thanks, singing their songs. And he looked around and he see these birds, because initially they didn't have a voice. And so the thought that came to him is that they need to have a song. They need to have a language. And so he called all the birds together, and he instructed them that at the next morning at sunrise, is that they're to fly into the sky as high as they could until they couldn't go any higher. And on their descent back down to earth, is that they're going to hear a song. And that species is going to be the only species in the whole world that's going to sing that song. That's going to be that species' song. That's going to be their language. And so they were all excited about that, because they're going to be able to give thanks just like the people, and sing their song just like the people. And so during that evening, that night, there was a bird that we call go. He's got a really big, beautiful song, and they call him the hermit thrush. And he was kind of feeling sorry for himself, because he was looking at all these big birds, these cranes, these big swans, the eagles, the owls, and even different kinds of other birds that were huge in comparison to him. And so he was thinking that his song wasn't going to be that powerful or strong, his language. And so a thought that came to him was that, well, everybody's going to be so excited at daybreak, and they're all going to take off all at once. And that what he's going to do, he's going to jump on the back of an eagle, because he's a big bird, and he's going to hide underneath his feathers on his back. And he's going to be so excited that he's not even going to notice. And so when that sun finally broke and they all took off, that's what he did. And they all took off into the sky. And as time goes on, one by one, they start coming back down. And they say the first one that came back to earth is what we call Lau Lau. Lau Lau is the hummingbird. And I've heard that bird one time. He sang his song for me. It's the little chirp that they have. And what the elders say is that song, that what it sounds like he's saying is, wait for me, wait for me. And so over time, all these other birds came down, and each one heard that song, and they start singing that song. They start giving thanks. And through that song, they're giving their thanks as well. Even Giese, what we call what's known as the robin, he has a song as well. And there's even a dance that we have to honor that bird when spring returns, as well as the lodal, what we call the morning dove. That's another song, another dance that we do to honor that bird too, because with that comes that spring. And so we do those dances in our ceremonies as well as for social. And over time, as time goes on, there's just a few left, and that was the eagles. And the eagle, they say, he touched the Creator's land. And in our teachings, we talk about what that world is like. And they say that in that world, there's no death, there's no disease, there's no suffering, there's no hunger, there's no thirst. And the word that we use to describe that in our language is skana go. Just like ya won't go, there's that go again. It means the ultimate, that go. And skana Skana has to do with a peacefulness, a real pleasantness, a real calmness, a sereneness within our whole being. So that's mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically, physically. All of that is that ultimate sereneness. And that's what we describe that world as. And that eagle touched that world. His wings touched that world. And he was so exhausted at that point when he turned to come down. That's when go, that hermit thrush, jumped off his back. And he was so exhausted, all he could do was turn and just look really mean at him. We call it the stink eye. And that's how that eagle is today. When you see an eagle up close, it's like they're looking mean, like they're looking right through you. And go kept on going. He went up into the crater's land, and he flew and flew and flew until he got tired, and he started to come back down to earth. And that's when he heard the most beautiful song, and he starts singing that song. And that really picked his spirit up, because he thought in his mind that this was the most powerful song of all. And as he's coming back down to earth, to where they all had gathered, that at the beginning, there's the crater. He's sitting there on the rock, and all over those trees and on the prairie, all over were all the birds of the world, and they're all looking up at him. And what he did was that he turned and he went deep into the forest where like hardly anybody goes. And he went there to hide, because he knew that what he did wasn't right, that he wronged, the eagle. And so the creator called him out to come, there's consequences. It's like that in life. That's what this song is about as well. Is that when we do something we know that is not right, there's always going to be a consequence. Even if nobody ever finds out, it's still going to be inside of you, because it's going to be in your mind. And so they say 3 times. 3 times he called them to come, but he wouldn't. So what the creator said then was that, well, this is going to be your punishment then, from this time forth. That's where you're going to live, deep in the forest, the darkest parts of the woods. And that's where you're going to stay. That's where you'll be your home. And whenever the other birds hear you sing your song, they're going to stop. And that's going to remind you as well, that you didn't do what was right. And so that's how it's going to be if we do that in life. If we don't make things right in our world and in our life, we wrong somebody, and we don't face the consequences. That's going to be with us for the rest of our life. And that can become generational. And I think we kind of understand a little bit about that, generational trauma. And so the creator then, what he did was that he gave the eagle responsibility to be the leader of all the birds. He's the epitome. He's the role model for all birds that they look up to. And he also then too gave him the responsibility to be a messenger to the people, and to watch over them, and to warn them whenever there's danger. And back in the day, we had people that were gifted like that. I've heard stories here in our community of people who were like that. And out east too, in our homelands, with our relatives out there, they know that too, that there are people like that. That's their gift that they have. Like that horse whisperer, eh? Well, we got bird whisperers. And so that's what he did to build that eagle spirit back up, because he felt so bad of what that hermit thrush, what he had did to him, and so that raised his spirit up, and that's how it is with us as well. When we do accomplishment or something, and we're kind of built up, in a good way to pick our fire up, so that we have that good feeling inside of us again. So there's a lot of teachings inside of that, but we really don't have the time. There's some other things too that goes with that. But that's the gist of the story of how the birds got their songs. So Toginik, Yonko.
Thank you so much, Randy, for sharing that story. I've now heard it 3 times, and I learn something new every time you tell it. So really appreciate you sharing that with us. I also want to share the sound of, so this is the hermit thrush, the doot doot go, that Randy was mentioning here. He's pictured here, and they really do have a beautiful song that I wanted to play so you can all hear what he was referencing. That's not, here we go. This is the one you will hear in Wisconsin. Absolutely beautiful, as you can tell. It's one of my favorites. Thrushes in general are some of my favorite bird songs. So doot doot go. Thank you, Randy, so much. I'm going to now pass it to Tony, who'll be sharing with you a lot about the work that Oneida Nation has done for restoration.
All right. Well, thank you, Erin. Thank you, Randy. I also learn something every time I listen to Randy. Every time. So I think most of us have an idea of where Oneida Nation is located, but this meeting seems to have cast a pretty broad net. So I'm including this slide to give the geographic location of where Oneida Nation is located. Yeah. And so you can see that yellow box, 65,400 acres roughly. And bisecting it is a blue line, and that's Duck Creek, and Duck Creek flows into the lower bay of Green Bay. We can forward to the next slide, Erin. So prior to the mid 1800s, this is what a lot of this area would have looked like. It was wooded swamps, ephemeral wetlands, vernal pools, call them what you want, but they were typically flooded, forested land in the springtime through early summer. These wooded swamps would have slowed the flow of water on the landscape and slowly released it into our streams as clean, cool water. And all of that water eventually ends up in the Bay of Green Bay. But that's no longer the case. And so if we go to the next slide, my theme really has to do with an altered landscape. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's some that are unique to Oneida. So to understand a little bit of that, you have to look at some of the social reasons behind that and the political reasons. So after there was a census, and they determined there is 654 heads of household living in the area. And so they created a reservation that gave everybody 100 acres essentially, every head of household. And so that's why the reservation is 65,400 acres. So then what happened after that though was that was the Allotment Act, the Dawes Act of 1887 that allotted land to the heads of the households living here at the time. But then what happened is there was taxation that occurred on that land, a pretty foreign concept. What that taxation did then is it incentivized the logging, the sale of land, and the conversion of land from its natural condition into agricultural land. So we went from, I did get Randy can jump in and correct me if he knows, So basically, the reservation went from 65,400 acres down to, I believe that number should be less than like 30 acres. It was not much at all. Is that correct, Randy? 30?
Yeah, by 1925.
Right, so by the 1920s, 1925, the Oneida Nation controlled about 30 acres of the 65,400. So as you can imagine, tremendous social and ecological impacts. If we want to put numbers to that, we've lost over 80% of our forests, 75% of our wetlands are no longer here. And there's really little or none of our native grasslands that remain. There's a few patches that occur along the railroad grade. And even those are becoming overrun by trees. So there's a photo here on this slide that's me. And it's one of our project areas that we'll get a picture of later. It's called Coyote Run. And this is right after the Oneida Nation reacquired that property in early 2000s. And if you're kind of a soil nerd, an ecological geek, you look at maps and you see this huge area of farmland that has hydric or wetland soils and ditching. And it's just kind of one of those areas that probably shouldn't be farmed, and it offered a really promising restoration opportunity. So what I'm walking through, I believe this was like June or July. It's hard to see on that photo, but there's all these linear lines in there, and it was where the cornfield was the prior year. So in all the plow furrows, there's all these native sedges and wetland plants growing. And then up on the hummocks, where the high parts where it was plowed, were a lot of non-native invasive things like Canada thistle. So the seed bank was there though, and really we just needed to devise a plan of how to restore that. So let's go to the next slide. Again, so the alteration of our landscape right now, I mentioned that we lost 80% of our forests, 75% of our wetlands. Now two-thirds of what remains is agricultural land. The rest of that is still in natural condition or considered like residential. So with that, going from that pristine condition to this, that whole web of connections, those ecological connections between the various habitat types, soil types, hydrological regimes, were just completely altered and in many cases destroyed. And so we have a lot of what this photo shows, and this is a farm field. There's a wet area in that field, so the farmer plowed a drainage feature through the field and into a tributary of Trout Creek. And we'll talk a little bit more about Trout Creek in a bit, but all of that alteration really, if you're an optimist, it provides opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity out there to try to get things back as close as we can with the tools we have and the knowledge we have, get things back to the way they were. So let's go to the next slide, Erin. So really what gives Oneida the power to do that is ownership of the land. So as we reacquire the land, that's where we get these opportunities to because we have control over that. We have control over the land use decisions, where if we didn't own it, we wouldn't. It sounds pretty simplistic, but that's really a key component. So, is the tribe trying to buy back all of the land? Yes, we are. So we can regain that control that we once had. So what we do is, in this case, this again is out at Coyote Run, and one of my coworkers, Wes, is out there with his survey equipment, and we're trying to figure out what's going on. if you look at that culvert, that's a 5-foot diameter culvert, and about 20% of it is filled in with sediment. That culvert was placed there about 10 years prior to this photo being taken. So in the span of less than a decade, we've accumulated about 1.5 feet of sediment in here. So we fix these things. Like that previous slide with that ditch furrow coming into the ditch, that's what we fix. And it's super important, and I don't want to downplay the importance of these minor fixes, these best management practices that, to use agency lingo, BMPs, best management practices. Those are things that we do to fix the problem. And again, to use agency speak, to fix the resource concern. So there's some big resource concerns in it. And so when we're going out there and we're doing that, it can sometimes seem like a little bit of a Band-Aid approach. You fix that one little problem. I also like to think of them as like 1%ers. Like if you do a whole bunch of little 1%ers, pretty soon you did 100%. But as important as those things are, as we reacquire more and more land, to really restore a watershed, to look at things in a landscape scale, you do need to think broader and think about a more of a holistic approach to repairing the landscape. So go ahead, Erin, you can forward. So where do we, how do you start? Where do you start? Now this is Coyote Run, that field where you saw me walking around in knee-high boots. I probably didn't even need knee-high boots out there, but it was flooded. It was wet. You can see the intact forest mixed in with the agricultural fields and the big wetland basin in there. That's where all those hydric soils were that I got excited over when I first was starting to look at the maps of this area. And I was really, really looking forward to the time when Oneida bought it, and they did. And that was one of our first big projects. So where to start? Let's go to the next slide, Erin. Where to start in our philosophy of repairing a landscape is the headwaters. You start in the headwaters and you work your way downstream. You don't worry too much about what you're looking at. I'll describe it, but this is the Trout Creek watershed. All that area in the shades of green with the blue lines. The blue lines are Trout Creek and its tributaries. What you're looking at there with the pie chart is that about 50% of the light green there, about 50% of that pie chart, that's agriculture, that's farmland. The lighter green color, 21% residential, and that's more off to the east side of Trout Creek. And then 20% is still forest. But one thing I like to point out to people that maybe aren't from around here or kind of just learning some of these ecological concepts is, if you're looking at a forest in Oneida or in other places, there's a reason it's not being farmed. It's either too wet, too steep, or too rocky. And we really don't have much steep or rocky around here. So it's too wet. So those forests are usually swamps that are left there. Just, you can't drain them to the degree that you'd be able to farm them. So 20% forest, 20% residential, and about 50% agricultural. So we like to look at the very top of the watershed, as far, like, where does a stream start, really? And it starts at these wetlands, like we saw on that beginning slide with that wooded swamp, and that's where they start. Now, we can't always turn back the hands of time and recreate that. How do you create a forest? It takes generations. It takes decades and decades. Not that we're not planting trees, but to recreate that is not something you can do overnight or in any short time frame. So what I like to think of what I do, what I get involved with is that I'm doing the best with what we have now, technology wise, knowledge wise, and I'm just trying to set the stage for whoever comes after me. If we can prevent something from becoming a subdivision and restore it to a more natural state, then it's there and it's not a subdivision. If someone after me decides that, what the best use is to make that a subdivision for housing, or if I get involved with restoring a wetland, maybe it's not the best wetland. Maybe I did something with the knowledge I had that there's going to be new techniques and new innovations, new thoughts of how to do something, but at least it's there and they can modify it. And hopefully I didn't muck it up too much for them. And hopefully we're doing a good job and leaving the place a little bit better than it is. Let's go to the next slide. So here we're looking at Trout Creek again. This is in upper reaches of Trout Creek, kind of mid upper reach, not all the way at the tippy top. And there's a lot going on here. I'm just gonna look down here because I took some notes. I just wanted to put some numbers to the things that Oneida's done over the last 20 years or so. We've put in over 300 of those best management practices, those BMPs, those things that my coworker is gonna be upset that I call a Band-Aid. They're not. They're super important, but they're these little things that we're doing on the landscape. If you're looking at this photo, you'll see that there's these tributaries and little legs that spur off into the farm field. Those are grass buffers. We're buffering the stream from the agricultural land use. That's a BMP. So we have BMPs going on out here, over 300 total over the last 20 years or so. Wetlands, we've restored or enhanced over 800, approaching 1,000 acres of wetland habitat. You can see some of that here. There's that really light green area with a dark blotch. Yep, right in there. Thanks, Erin. That was a farmed wetland. That was drowned out soybeans when I first looked at it. So over 800, approaching 1,000 acres of wetland restored. Over 1,000 acres of prairie restored. Well, what we're looking at is a stream corridor. And we've essentially widened the buffer along that stream corridor and planted prairie. Out here, I want to say it was 50 acres-ish, give or take 10 acres or so. So we planted a prairie along the stream. Well, why would we do that? Because prairies have very deep root systems and they can break through the hard subsoil layer that's been compacted by heavy equipment use of the tractors and plows going out there working the soils wet. Those prairie plants can break through that and they promote the water to infiltrate and not to just run off on the surface. So we're promoting infiltration of water. When water goes down instead of across the land, it gets cleaned and it cools off. So we're hopefully adding cool, clean water as groundwater entering the stream, cooling it down. Trout Creek is a cool with cold water sections. Reforestation, I think we're approaching 1,000 acres of reforested area as well. We planted trees in a prairie, which is counterintuitive. Why would you plant trees in a prairie? How can you burn the prairie? How can you manage a prairie if there's trees in it? Well, you're not easily, and we're not. We wanted those prairie grasses there because that's a native plant community. And it takes a long time for trees to get established. Now, if we can have those trees in there, and eventually they're going to get taller than the prairie grasses, they're going to also promote infiltration. They're going to provide shade eventually. They're going to shade the stream, and they're going to intercept rainwater. think of a tree, and if it's raining out, where you're gonna run under the tree so you don't get wet, right? And hopefully there's no lightning, but they intercept that water, and it's all about slowing water down, really. And so we planted trees out there. So we have all these things going on in this one project. It's really kind of cool that everything is happening there. Well, and then it's a stream project, really. It's a stream project. It's a stream corridor. So what did we do there? Well, we took a trapezoidal shaped agricultural ditch that was just straight across the farmland, and we re-meandered it. So I don't know the numbers here. I think my supervisor, Jim Snitchen, might be on the call. But let's just say, for instance, say it was a mile long. Well, now we re-meandered that, and it's a mile and a half long. Well, it's going to take, that water's got to flow another half mile. So it's slowing the water down. It slows it down. And now it's providing more in-stream habitat too. Instead of this straight reed canary ditch, there's all kinds of little bends, and there's probably not so many pools and riffles in here, but there's a lot of diverse habitat, a lot more than what would have been there in a ditch. And then to that point, more numbers for you to brag up Oneida a little bit. 4.3 miles of stream have been restored in Oneida in the last 20 years. And by modifying culverts and dams and doing removals of culverts and dams, we have opened up over 200 miles to fish passage. So, one perch culvert can block 100 miles of travel for a fish. And Jim and our Oneida Nation has been doing a lot of really important stream work. We can see that here too. We actually, where this stream section goes under County Highway U, we modified that culvert to allow fish passage there as well. So a lot going on in one little, not so little project. Okay, Erin, let's go to the next slide. I'm kind of rambling on here, probably running out of time. But then we get caught up in this identify the problem, find a solution to it, implement that solution, manage what you just did, and then you repeat it. It's a cycle. It's over and over and over again, and it's great. And we're doing all this wonderful habitat work. And it's providing all kinds of ecological and social benefits. And it's all wonderful, but how wonderful is it? And we don't know unless we're doing monitoring. We can measure acres and miles of stream, and those are fairly easy to get at, but how well is it working? So with the exception of our streams, lakes, and rivers, where we have a pretty robust monitoring program, we really don't know how well the reforested area or the prairie or the wetland, how well is that doing? And really, you got to look at who's living there. And that's where new Audubon, Great Lakes Audubon come into play. They're helping with that. So there's a picture of Brad Kasberg. He cold called me, just called me out of the blue and said, got your name. And I saw some of the work Oneida Nation's been involved with. He's tribal affiliated, and he felt comfortable reaching out, and he proposed a partnership. He wanted to write a grant proposal, and he wanted Oneida Nation to partner with that. And I loved what he was talking about. I loved his ideas. I agreed with it. And we partnered on a proposal, and it wasn't funded. Nothing's a guarantee. I thought it was a really strong proposal. I was shocked that it didn't get funded, but it didn't. However, it didn't end our relationship. And Brad reached out to Erin, and the three of us started talking, and the next thing you know, here we are on October 18th. And Erin can take it from there and talk about that partnership and all the work that we've done this field season with it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tony. It is thanks to Brad calling Tony that connected Oneida with New Audubon, which I am so thankful for that really came out of that. And I actually dug back through my emails, Tony, to recall when I was first mentioned to me, it was like June of last year. And then things really started rolling in fall of last year. And I'm so thankful for that. And as Tony mentioned, you know, it's always good to know, how successful the restoration work is, and birds are a great way to help answer that question. Build it and they will come is largely applicable in the case here with Oneida. So uh, we sat down together, Oneida and Audubon Great Lakes and New Audubon, and started to outline some project goals for the work that we had sought out. So the first goal is just to collect the data, the bird data. So we launched breeding marsh and grassland bird surveys this summer of 2021 at Trout Creek and Coyote Run, the two sites Tony mentioned. I'll have some maps in a minute to show you where those took place. And then this past fall, we've run migratory shorebird surveys. Those ended last Friday. And we're continuing with fall migratory waterfowl surveys as well. Those will continue basically until the water freezes over at the two ponds at Trout Creek and Coyote Run. So that's the first goal, collect the data to help understand what birds are using these places. Another goal was to build a community of bird watchers, find a reason to get together and go bird watching together. And we had organized field teams where there would be a bird expert conducting the surveys. And then we had volunteers come along with the experts who helped with navigation, scribing for the bird expert, taking photos, and just building a community of people. And then we also, our goal was education and outreach. So we're sharing the information that we're collecting, share the birds that we're seeing, and teach each other about the birds and the surveys themselves, and the landscape and the restoration work that Tony and others have done at Oneida. And then another goal was to exchange cultural information about the Oneida Nation. And thankfully, Randy has really been the key person that's done that. And that's, out of all these project goals, that's probably my most favorite, has been learning about Oneida culture. And we're so thankful for Randy to be the leader in that. And then lastly, this is getting at the point Tony has made, using the bird data to inform management decisions. What birds are there, and how is that going to affect what he does on the landscape? And Tony will share with you that in a little bit. So where are we monitoring birds? So this is Google Map. This is the Oneida Nation. This rectangle here, and the sites that we surveyed are located generally where the star is positioned. This is Trout Creek to the east. This is roughly 300 acres or so. And then we also monitored birds on the east portion of this area. And then Coyote Run is to the west, this really large, gorgeous wetland here on a large body of water. So these are the map that you're showing, these stars here, these circles with stars. We monitored 22, we surveyed at 22 grassland bird points in the summer and 7 marsh bird points as well. And just a reminder, this is Trout Creek. This is north where I'm pointing my arrow. This is Reformatory Road and County Line Road here. And this is pretty much all grassland, except the area adjacent to the pond is primarily marsh habitat. And then this is Coyote Run, that site to the west, which is just an absolutely gorgeous marsh that Tony restored, that has beautiful native plants, native emergent and aquatic plants. I mentioned we did migratory shorebird and waterfowl surveys. And that's what these 2 points are here, right? This blue polygon here is the body of water, the pond at Trout Creek. And we have 2 points located on the berm here. And then this green turquoise point at Coyote Run is a shorebird and waterfowl survey location. So across all of our surveys, so keep in mind, we haven't had a chance to enter shorebird and waterfowl data yet, but across all the surveys, we've had 22 people total participate in the surveys, which is just a tremendous number of people, all of which this wouldn't be possible without them. 7 of those 25 people are bird experts. These are the people that conducted the surveys themselves. And then we had 5 college student attendees, which I thought was great. Would love to increase that and get more student participation. And so far, again, we're still tabulating the data, so we haven't entered everything, but I estimated roughly at least more than 80 species total have been reported across all the breeding and migratory surveys, and counting over 6,000 birds. But those numbers are still continuing to tick upwards. And right now, the Trout Creek site is also an eBird hotspot location. And so their birders have been spending time along Reformatory Road there, and have actually tallied over 100 species at that one spot. So obviously it's a really important place for birds. So now what I'll do is I'll go through some of the highlights of our breeding survey data, since we do have that entered from the summer. So we documented 37 species during the grassland surveys, 49 species during marsh bird surveys. And then if you find the unique species list between the grassland and marsh bird surveys, we recorded 61 unique species, which amounted to 2,972 birds counted, a little over almost 3,000 birds total, which is tremendous. And I'll go through some highlights of the grassland birds and marsh birds. So I want to emphasize just how significant the Trout Creek site is for grassland birds. It is the best, highest quality grassland east of Buena Vista Marsh near Stevens Point, the Plover area. And that is absolutely tremendous. Tony just did a fabulous job creating that grassland habitat to create such important strongholds for a number of birds. So we documented huge numbers of Dick Sissel. That's the bird featured here. They were almost as common as red-winged blackbirds out there. It was unbelievable how many I counted at all of my points every time I was out there. We also recorded really good numbers of bobolink, eastern meadowlark, that's going to be on the next slide pictured, Savannah sparrow, and sedge wren. Also really great birds to pick up. And then we had a few records of Henslow's sparrow and grasshopper sparrow, which is tremendous. If you have a Henslow's sparrow, it's an amazing feat. And we actually picked up 5 individual Henslow sparrows during the surveys, and 1 grasshopper sparrow, also a rarity for the area. So those were great. And then I also found a nesting colony of cliff swallows. Cliff swallows are not grassland obligate birds, but they like big open spaces for feeding. And so it's no surprise that they found there's a structure out there that they nested on with their mud nests and used the big grassland to feed. So I wanted to kick it to Randy briefly to tell us about the eastern meadowlark, which is the bird pictured here, and teach you about its Oneida name. Go ahead, Randy.
Yeah, we call that bird Ochunlala. Ochunlala. And it's like it's landing on top of it. And Ochunlala is what we call that bird.
Thanks, Randy. Eastern meadowlark is a wonderful, absolutely wonderful bird to get in grasslands, and we certainly got great looks at eastern meadowlarks. So I mentioned Trout Creek provides a tremendous stronghold for grassland birds of about 300 acres of high quality plants, a lot of native grassland plants, thanks to Tony. And this is really significant because grassland birds are one of the #1 groups of birds that are declining in North America. I've shown you this graphic here on the right that 3 and 4 eastern meadowlarks have been lost since 1970, according to the study 2 years ago by Rosenberg et al. That have talked about just how in dire straits grassland birds are. So it's no surprise that they found this amazing grassland, since there isn't much for grassland, a lot of it got converted to agriculture across the country. And this is obviously a really critical place. And I'm pushing for including Oneida as an important bird area, which is a status that would really provide conservation effort directions to be pointed in Oneida's way. It could help with funding for Tony to get additional funding for restoration work. And it just absolutely belongs as an important bird area. So I'm going to be advocating for that over the coming years. The Oneida, so then we also did, remember, the marsh bird surveys, breeding surveys, and documented a wonderful suite of marsh birds, including American bittern, pied-billed grebe, Virginia rail, sora, swamp sparrow, marsh wren, sedge wren, and red-winged blackbirds. Lots of others, but those are some really key marsh birds that one would hope to find in a really large, substantial marsh, like the one at Coyote Run and Trout Creek. Trout Creek also is, and Coyote Run provide huge staging areas for sandhill cranes and waterfowl, which is wonderful. And then the big highlight that was documented by Jack Swalstead, Jim Johnson, and Tom Presby, documented Wilson's phalarope as very likely breeding records of two nesting pairs of Wilson's phalarope out at Trout Creek. The breeding bird atlas, the Wisconsin did a breeding bird atlas a few years ago, and across the entire state there were only maybe 5 to 10 records of breeding records of Wilson's phalarope in the whole state. So to get this at Oneida, and Oneida was not one of the sites picked up because this Trout Creek site didn't exist a few years ago. So that's an absolutely tremendous observation that was picked up out at Trout Creek, thanks to our volunteers. Sandhill crane, I'm going to kick it back to Randy to tell you a little bit about the Oneida word for sandhill.
The word we call it is degaluhyagane. That ending is whispered. It's something unique about our language. We put it in context, so it would be Degaluhyaganle, de Guayats is what its name is. And inside of that word is the word for a sky, Oluya, for the color blue. That Gane part of the word there, that's the looking at or staring at the sky. This day at the beginning is the directional prepronominal prefix that and it kind of goes to that courtship that they do. I've seen that, where they kind of throw things up in the air and look around, and that's the name that our people refer to this bird as. Some call it prime rib of the sky.
That's funny, Randy. I love that the Oneida names reflect the behavior of the birds. I think that's really, really, really cool. So the significance of marsh birds, the observations that were picked up of our surveys, is also tremendous. The places that we monitored, it's quite clear, quite obvious that it's those places are providing really important breeding habitat for these marsh birds. And while not as in dire straits as grassland birds, marsh birds are declining, at least some of the species are. And so this is another really great stronghold for marsh birds looking for habitat in the breeding season. And it's all thanks to the native plants that are found there and diverse, complex habitats available to them. So we're still tabulating our migration data. But I thought for those curious, here's at least a list of some of the migratory shorebirds that have been detected out there so far. We just finished those last Friday, October 15th. We've been running them since mid-July. The asterisks indicate those that are fairly commonly detected. However, we have picked up quite a few American golden plovers and dowitchers as of late. Don't know how common they compare in comparison to some of these others, but we definitely have picked up quite a few of those. And perhaps one of the star species would be Hudsonian godwit, was quite quite a great bird that was found there. And then waterfowl surveys are still continuing. We're planning to survey waterfowl until the water's frozen, but here's at least an idea of some of the ducks and other waterfowl that we've picked up so far on surveys. We are still looking for people to volunteer for the rest of this season. So if you are interested, please feel free to reach out to me, Giese, that's Giesee, at uwgb.edu. I can drop my email in the chat in a minute. Certainly welcome. No experience required. If you have an interest in birds or being out in nature, meeting new people, whatever excuse you want, come on and join us. We'd love to have you. And now I'm going to kick it back to Tony to tell you a little bit about how the bird data that we've collected will be informing land management decisions that Tony's making.
Great. Yeah, thank you again, Erin. Thank you so much for all the hard work that went into the what you just described. It's pretty amazing. So, right. So what to do with that information? That's information I wouldn't have had. I would have been able to go out there and look at plants. I'm a plant person, not a bird person. I have terrible hearing for one, and I just have never been trained as an ornithologist at all. So having this network of experts and volunteers and Audubon, Northeast Wisconsin and Great Lakes, it's just been an incredible experience, and it's really going to help us. So how will it help us? Now that we know who's there, what do they like? Well, we know they like grassland, but when you get into the nitty-gritty of it, there's going to be some management decisions to make. Grasslands evolved with fire. So we need to use fire as a tool out there. Should we burn all 300 acres? Probably not. I think we would completely alter the habitat, at least for a season. So then the idea is to probably go in there and schedule burns in a more natural way, maybe in a mosaic of 10, 40 acre patches over the next 10 years, maybe with a combination of mowing, seasonal mowing timed at the right moment. So we're not going to disrupt nesting birds. And so I can work with Audubon staff now, Tom Presby, and I've been talking a bit now about what does it look like to schedule burns out here. And I'm really excited to do that, to map it out. Vegetation management, how are these birds reacting to what's out there? Can we improve upon it? I do plan on planting more sedge meadow plants along the boundary of the open water area. I had planned on that before I had this data. So how is that going to change? Is that going to be good? Is it going to be bad? We don't know, but we will know. We will know by who's using it and how many species different species and numbers are using that habitat. We can manipulate water levels out there. There's a fly buzzing around me. We can manipulate the water levels. Well, this August we had over 9 inches of rain, going on 10 inches of rain, and that pool filled all the way up to maximum capacity. We've got all these shorebirds coming through in July and August, and what they're looking for is shallow mudflats. That's where all the little aquatic invertebrate insect species are, and that's what they eat. A lot of protein and fat to fuel them on their trip down south. Well, it was too deep for them. So I was able to go in knowing that this is going to be an important stopover. And I was able to go in and lower the water level by pulling a couple of boards out of our control structure. And I dropped it a foot. And it made a huge difference. And the species that are being detected and the numbers are a reflection of that. Coyote run, I did the opposite. For many years, we kept the water out there fairly low, lower than we could hold it. And it was mostly mudflat. And it was just amazing the few people that got a glimpse of it back then, you should have been here yesterday, right? The numbers and the diversity of shorebirds that were out there would blow people's minds that knew what they were looking at. To me, they all look very similar. But now, then I had an opportunity to raise the water level, and I did. I raised it about a foot, and the wild rice and arrowhead, all these native plants that had been just kind of sitting there waiting for the water to come back, boom, they exploded this year. So not so good for shorebirds. They're out there, but really good for waterfowl. There's going to be a lot of waterfowl using. There's a lot of food out there now. That rice, the roots of the arrowhead, the seed of the arrowhead, all the weedy annual wetland plants that we don't like because they kind of stick into you like bitins. You don't like to walk through it because you get covered in burrs. That's all really high protein, high fat food for waterfowl. And so that's out there now. So now what do? Maybe I lower it maybe I raise it at Coyote Run and let that rice propagate, and then maybe I can slowly bring that down in August to improve it for shorebirds. If the data is telling us that that's important, if we're seeing species that are in decline are starting to show up, and this is critical habitat from them. So this is where I need to look to the experts. I can plant a seed. I half jokingly say my job is planting the pretty flowers, and so we planted 300 acres of pretty flowers. And there's more to it than that, but essentially that's kind of what we do, or did here. And to see the excitement with the people that know what they're looking at, I get excited because I see the plants that we planted and they're there and they're doing good. But to see the birders out there seeing and hearing what's using this habitat, that gets me, excited. That's what gets me up in the morning and drives me. And I know that, and we're trying to share that knowledge and that message with the Oneida Nation a little bit better, do a better job of that. And because these are, and this is something Randy said, and it really resonated with me. I think about this all the time. He said, these are voices that have not been heard in a very long time. And just, wow, I never thought of it that way. And but it's true. And that guides me. It really does. So, so again, I just want to thank Randy and Erin and all the other expert birders and volunteers, and the staff with Audubon that I will be working on as we look to properly managing this. It might just another quick little anecdote. We have hay land next door, hay and grazing land next to this project, and they took hay, and unfortunately, it seems like the meadowlarks and bobolinks probably took a hit. They mowed during the nesting season. So now maybe we can modify that lease in that area, or maybe they don't take that first cutting of hay. Maybe it gets a little mature. These are the things as a manager that I can work with our Oneida Nation staff and the leaseholders to see if that's a possibility. How can we work with them? Maybe it's a lower cost lease. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But it was kind of a heartbreaking thing that happened. I don't want to bring up a negative, but it's a reality. But we wouldn't have known had we not been monitoring. So in a way, it's a success. All right, I'll stop yammering on here. So thank you.
Definitely a success, Tony, the work that you've done. Build it and the birds came, and we're so thankful. And we're thankful that you're willing to and able to create these amazing landscapes for all wildlife, and are just thrilled to be able to be a part of it. So before we open it up for questions, I will allow Randy to share with you some closing remarks.
Well, what Tony was talking about, is that for so many years, the animals, the waters, the plant world, the birds, and even the greater forces that are in the sky didn't have a voice in terms of us carrying on our responsibilities as people and ensuring that they be heard. Because in our teachings, they say that that was one of our responsibilities that was given to the people, was to take care of the land. And we looked at the earth as our mother, and that we're to treat her as just as the same as our biological mother. And like I was saying before, all these things that are out here that the Creator put here, that's family. And so we were given that responsibility to be the voice for them, and to look out after them and to protect them. And I think the things that the tribe has been doing here for the last 25, 30 years, in terms of enhancing the land, the environment, all the things the environmental department and other departments are doing, is starting to be more proactive in that, and being the voice, of the natural world. And that's something that it's just it's an emotional thing, especially for me. And because I've been here all my life, I grew up here and I've seen the devastation that went on with our land here. And I've heard the stories from my grandparents of the deforestation that went on in their generation right at the turn of the 18th, 19th century. And it's sad. It's a really sad thing to see. But with a clear vision, and in our case, that cultural connection, continuity, this is to me a very, very prime example of what can be done and what will continue to be done in our community, because this is something that we need to continuously do, is to be that voice, for the natural world. So I just commend, everybody involved in this project. It took a lot of work, and I commend each and every one of us, and just happy to be a part of this. It's something I just kind of fell into. I seen that, they want to go look at some birds. I know a little bit about them and know a bunch of their names and stuff and their habits, and I'm no bird expert, but yeah, I'll go learn. I'm always open-minded for that, to learn. And this has been a very, very good experience for me, and I'm looking forward to being out there, in the future. And if this continues on to the next year, that'd be awesome. So y'all go to everybody.
Thank you so much, Randy. And to Tony, apologize, we went over time, so I'm gonna open it up for questions here. You're welcome to unmute yourselves. I think there was a question in the chat, so I'm gonna start there. Okay, one question was answered. Please send your opinion tonight or before tomorrow, as the sandhill crane hunt is being voted on tomorrow. Who is that question directed at, Amy? Is Amy still on? Amy Sheldon. Don't see. Oh, Amy is here. Amy, if you want to add your who that question is directed at to the chat, that would be wonderful. All of us, we have a chance to weigh in before the vote tomorrow. I'm not an expert on what's going on, but there is a proposal to open the hunt of sandhill cranes in the state of Wisconsin tomorrow. And I guess the recommendation would be, if you're against that, then certainly encourage you to contact your political representatives on that. I'll let I know there's some other new Audubon board members, so you're welcome to chime in here, or Tony, if anyone has comments on that. Carmela asked, are the sunflower fields on Oneida land part of the land management? So that would be directed at Tony.
Yes. I think most of the sunflower fields that you're seeing are probably part of our organic farming operation, Junhinqua. And Junhinqua is using sunflowers to build up biomass, and it's a very deep-rooted plant, so it can start pulling nutrients up from the subsoil and break through that hard pan. So I believe, and I don't want to speak for Junhinqua, but my understanding is that they're using sunflowers as one of a way to start repairing the soil before they either grow Oneida white corn, or if they're going to convert it to a pasture for haying, is my assumption. So the short answer is yes, as part of a management technique, but not directly through our environmental department, but through our organic farm, Junhinqua.
Great, thank you, Tony. Mike Reed asked, the United Nations has set wonderful work for their people and an example for Northeastern Wisconsin. How many acres of the original allotments does the Oneida Nation currently own?
That's a tough one. I'm not sure. I think we're approaching 50% land ownership. So it's late, whatever 50% of 65,400. We're approaching that. So not quite half bought back.
That's a great question. I hope it continues
Yeah.
to increase, Tony. Josh has a comment. Thank you again to Oneida and New Audubon for putting this together, this great presentation, and keep up the great partnership. And I did forget another comment at the top here that Amy Sheldon wrote to Randy in relation to the creation story that you told, Randy. Amy says, this is a story that unites us all. I am so honored to have heard Randy relate this to us. Thank you for that comment. Nicole Schutt says, amazing project. Are there any plans to expand monitoring efforts to include other species, such as invertebrates, including bees, butterflies, dragonflies? And Nicole has a lot of expertise in that realm, so that's why she's asking if you could answer that, Tony. Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah. So yes, there's other things being monitored. We're contracting some of that work. We are looking at some of our turtle populations, our bat populations, and we're doing some additional bird monitoring as well. As invertebrates, other than our streams and lakes, which Jim Snidgen does a fair amount of monitoring. There's what's known as indices of biological integrity. So streams have got some really interesting ways of measuring the health, and by looking at the stream insects, you can gauge how healthy the stream is. But are we looking at terrestrial invertebrates? And we haven't been, but I'm interested in maybe carrying on that conversation at another time, because I am interested in that for sure.
It's a great question. It would be excellent pollinator habitat, Nicole. So great question. If you're interested, or others, just let me know and I can get you in contact with Tony. A couple other comments from Linda Ganas. That's my mom and dad. A very inspirational presentations. Thank you. Carmela Schmidt says, great presentation. Thanks for sharing. And then my mom says, can you tell us the origin of the funding for this work? Are you asking about the funding? So that's a two-parted question. Do you want to address the restoration piece, and I'll address the bird monitoring piece, Tony?
Sure.
Okay,
so originally funding for this project, it started out as a grant proposal for Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding, GLRI. And when the Natural Resource Conservation Service, part of the USDA, when the NRCS heard about it, they got really interested in it because there was a new Farm Bill program coming out called the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. So you might be familiar with some of their other programs like the CRP, Conservation Reserve Program. It's kind of like that. But this was set up to accommodate tribal nations. Prior to this, it was an easement program and still in a name, but for a government agency to hold an easement on tribal land, especially tribal land that might be held in trust, it's not going to happen. So they modified that language where it was a contract. So that gets starting to get into the weeds out there with all the nitty gritty of it. But the majority of the funding came through this program, the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. And I worked with Julie Peterson and others with NRCS. And so we get an annual payment. We'll get an annual payment for the next 10 years for implementing the project. We got a cost share funding to implement the project. And we also received Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding to implement the project. And then I think the seed I'm going to plant this fall actually came from another program. It's for tribal nations. It's through Bureau of Indian Affairs called the Circle of Flight program. And that's oh gosh, I don't know, I'm losing my thought here on that. But anyway, so it's government funded for pretty much all of it was funding from the federal government.
Thanks, Tony. And the bird monitoring piece was funded through the National Audubon Society. They administer a lot of grants annually. There was a lapse during COVID, but we were able to earn this special funding primarily because National Audubon's one of their main goals or mission is to really expand on equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging projects. And so this project really ties with building connections with First Nations communities, the Oneida Nation. And so we were allocated, New Audubon was allocated funding to help pay for the bird monitoring. Jade Arneson, she's one of our board members on the New Audubon, says, I echo what others have said about the restoration work and monitoring efforts. Really amazing partnership and effort that has been undertaken. Randy, your story gave me goosebumps. I loved hearing it. Thank you. Thanks, Jade.
Bird bumps.
Goosebumps. That's hilarious. I never thought about it like that. Awesome. Well, thank you for the excellent questions, everyone. I will certainly allow you, to take off whenever you need. I did promise a mini social. So those of you who want to stay on and chat birds, or if you want to jump off and go to bed, I certainly understand that as well. But so thankful for everyone who tuned in tonight and listened to this awesome project that we've been a part of. We're so thankful. So I'm going to stay on for anyone who wants to stay on. Welcome to turn on your video if you want to chat birds.
One quick comment, Erin.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
About the cranes and the crane hunt. I know Randy alluded to how good they taste, and I've been told that by my friends who go to North Dakota and hunt them. But in Wisconsin, because of the whooping crane restoration effort, and it's the center of it for the Eastern United States, the possibility of an accidental killing of a whooping crane when they're hunting sandhills, to me, means that we shouldn't be hunting sandhills at this point in Wisconsin.
Period.
Agreed. That's my concern as well. There's less than 1,000 whooping cranes in the country. So it could be a mistaken identity, someone accidentally shooting one, which would be bad.
Yeah. There was just a show on PBS about the whooping crane, the whole history of it, down to 15 birds, I think, at one time. And now they got well over 800. Yeah, so it's quite project that they undertook there.
And they move around a lot. They have been on occasion seen in northeastern Wisconsin, I think, haven't they, Erin?
On Oneida, Tony, want to take that one?
Yeah.
Tony, did you
Yeah,
want to mention that?
We've had several here. One was actually when detected during the crane count. He heard it and then went back and verified, snuck up over where he thought it was, and there was a whooping crane hanging out with some sandhills. We've had a few other occasions with them here. We had a brother and sister pair that stayed here the entire summer. We've had a few individuals come through, and then we, of course, work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and International Crane Foundation, which is kind of neat because then you can learn the whole life history and story of that bird you saw, because they're all banded and have radio transmitters on them. They know they're there. We just verify it for them. Yeah.
Any fun bird sightings for anybody lately that you've seen that you want to share?
I will share a story. I don't know how fun it was, but I got a call on a day off to go, and someone spotted a whooping crane. So I went to verify, and which would have been pretty simple. I would have notified the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Crane Foundation, and it's 1 or 2 emails. But it wasn't. It was a pelican in a pasture. And long story short, it was injured, and I went down and working with Bay Beach Wildlife Sanctuary, I went down there and was able to capture it and put a blanket over it, and we carried it back and got it in a crate, and we got it to the sanctuary eventually. But what I learned from that experience is pelicans have lice, and they bite a lot. And I was being attacked. It wasn't quite a bee, it was more than a mosquito, and I was just covered in them. I didn't know what it was. I was out there in the field with my shirt off, waving it to get the dang pelican lice out of there, and they're on me. I'm just kind of just feeling it right now talking about it. It was not not pleasant. Unfortunately, the pelican passed away despite all the really great efforts that Bay Beach had, antibiotics and pain meds and heated crate and food and water, and it had a perforated pouch. I don't know how or why. But pelican lice. That was my
Didn't
my
know that they
discovery.
could bite you. That's
Yeah.
awful.
Oh yeah.
We're gonna be putting transmitter. The reason I'm like really unhappy about that is we're putting transmitters on American white pelicans next summer.
So you'll learn about lice then. Yeah.
That sounds terrible. Anybody else have a story to share?
Well, there was about a week ago, there was a Merlin by the casino. The Radisson in the parking lot.
Oh, what by the casino?
A Merlin.
Oh, nice. So that's a small falcon. It's bigger than a kestrel, but smaller than a peregrine falcon. That's a great bird, Mike.
Yeah, and pelicans have a lot of lice.
You would know. Mike used to work at the Bay Beach Wildlife Sanctuary. Lovely. My bird sighting is long-billed dowitcher. Tom Pressme got me that as a life bird for myself at Oneida on the Trout Creek.
I don't really have any rare bird sightings, but today while I was working from home, I spent way too much money, if you ask my wife, on native plants last year and this year. And today I watched a flock of about 25 goldfinches, 15 juncos, and 10 white-throated sparrows just gorge on all the seed heads and everything in my native plant garden. So that was really fun for me to watch, and hopefully they'll just get more and more used to that resource being there.
Well, it was worth planting then. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, there've been a lot of goldfinches moving these days all over the place.
Yeah, and some birders are starting the first reports on eBird of some of the winter finches. We've had one local report of white-winged crossbills last week, and then up north, I saw the first report of pine grosbeak today, and I think siskin. So even though it still feels like summer, some of the winter birds are moving a little bit. Oh, and I saw on Sunday, I saw snow buntings out at Cat Island. So
Wow.
a couple of the winter birds are starting to creep in.
Wow. Is that early for snow bunting?
It's a teeny bit on the early end of their arrival window, but it's basically right about when they start to arrive is mid to late October. So they'll be increasing quickly.
That's really exciting.
No snowy owls that I've heard of yet, but sometimes they show up in late October too. So keep your eye out for them.
Yes, they do. And they could show up at the grassland at Oneida. That would
Oh,
be
yeah.
a really great place for them.
Absolutely. I mean, that's not that far from the Freedom area, which is a huge hotspot for them. So I'm sure maybe Tony's seen some or Randy's seen some or heard secondhand, but I wouldn't be surprised if some people have seen them out there in past years.
Yeah, they've been out by the airport in that area. We've seen them out there
Mm-hmm. Okay.
in the past.
I don't know if Jack Swellstad's still on or not. I saw his
I
face
don't
earlier,
think so.
but, I know he has seen short-eared owl in the grasslands of Victoria and Olson Road before. So that's definitely a bird that, again, another one of those birds that found the grassland habitat and started using it right away. And the best time to look for them is November and probably the first half of December. So, yeah.
It's a great place for them. Absolutely. There have been a few more comments that have come in. For Randy from Brian, he said, "Gotta get the kids to bed. Randy, please say hi to Kathy from Carla and me. Thanks, everyone." Stephen Ferguson says, "Knew the biting lice is new." Yeah, new for me too. Jennifer Webster says, "Thank you in Oneida." I don't remember how to pronounce that word, but thank you for all of your hard work. My mother lives across the watershed there and is now a bird lover. We lost my dad last year to COVID. Oh, that's really terrible. And honestly feel watching and listening to the birds have helped her with her healing. She loves to listen to them and looks forward to her evenings with them. Thank you for sharing that. I don't know, Jennifer's not still signed in. And then Stephen Ferguson says, "I'm easy to please. First bird I ever worked on was juncos. Still happy to see the first one each year." Yes, I've seen juncos as well down in Appleton where I live. Anybody else have any cool bird stuff to share or any other fun nature sighting that you've seen? Doesn't have to be a bird.
Erin?
Yeah.
Yeah, we were debating whether or not to say this, but about the pelican lice. It sounds like an old wives' tale, but we're pretty sure it works. When pelicans are brought in to the rehabbers here injured, and some have lice, the rehabbers they wrap white towels around their heads, the tops of their head, and the lice migrate up to the towel for the white, and then it gets rid of most of them, and then they take it off and continue to work. So It's a true story in terms of it being related to us, but we have no firsthand experience with it. So just thought we mentioned that.
Tiny.
We're not swearing to it.
That's awesome. So my parents live in Florida and they rescue birds all the time as volunteers. So they capture birds that are injured in the field and they bring them to rehab centers. So appreciate that advice. Might be wearing a white towel when we're trying to put transmitters on pelicans next summer. Oh man. Well, I think with that, it's about 8:45 Central Time, at least 9:45 Eastern Time. I think I'm gonna take off here and make sure everyone gets to whatever they need to do the rest of the night. So thankful for everyone who stayed to chat longer, and thanks again so much to Randy and Tony for presenting on this project and sharing it with everyone.
Yo.
Everyone have a great night. Thanks again. Bye-bye.